Okay, I think we can get started. So, welcome everyone to this talk. First of all, I want to thank the Harvard Business School Association of Hong Kong and the Yale Club of Hong Kong for organizing this event, and a special thanks to Rowan and Karen for making this event happen. So, just want to quickly go over the format before we get started. So, we're going to start with Josh and I will talk about his book, and then we're going to leave questions for the last 15 to 20 minutes. So, please raise your hand virtually or enter your questions you have in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. And as a reminder that this event is being recorded. So it's my pleasure to introduce Josh Benaim. Josh founded ARIA Development Group in 2009 to create a different kind of values-driven real estate company, one that would marry value investment philosophy with the traditional real estate principles of location, scarcity, and beauty. Since then, it has cultivated an expertise in next generation family, multifamily, and is currently developing more than 1,500 beautiful, affordable luxury and mixed income apartments in great neighborhoods across the United States. ARIA brings a unique philosophy and passion to multifamily investing, development, and management, rooted in humanistic values and a willingness to think different. Josh grew up in New York, where he picked up opera, singing, and has toured the world and appeared at the Metropolitan Opera. He has sought to infuse ARIA's real estate developments with a meaningful multisensory experience by marshaling some of the poetry, passion, and historical authenticity he found in opera. So, welcome, Josh. Thanks for sharing your early morning with us to our listeners in Hong Kong.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, I thought I'd start by taking Arthur Siegel's quote for your book. And he said, your book, Real Estate, A Love Story, is a journey of joy. So what inspired you to write this book?
Well, it really started. I was in London. It started in a hotel room on hotel stationery in London, and I started writing. I was actually crashing an HBS field study, real estate field study, meeting London business folks. I thought that sounded like a great trip, so I decided to join, and uh, and I started writing about. This was about 5 years ago. I started writing my principles and thoughts about how real estate investing should be done. And I started then illustrating these principles by telling some stories um, that really were meaningful to me and how I learned real estate. Because I think it's how if you I try to recapitulate how you learn something, um, and really the art of learning is a big part of my story and also my book. So I realized that here we have the largest asset class in the world, and that very few people understand. And there's no book that, as far as I know, there really isn't an easy to read, fun to read book that talks about the why, the how, and what the real estate business means. Many of us are in it as a business. If we're not in it as a business, we live it, we breathe it, we sleep in it, we work in it. Um, so I thought that there was a need for this kind of a story, and it happened to be a story that I wanted to tell. So it's really started pouring out, and little by little, I thought it would be more of a textbook almost, and I thought it would be more of a how-to guide. But in fact, um, for aspiring real estate investors and developers. But in the end, I was convinced that actually people loved the storytelling and loved hearing about really what a life in business is about, and that ended up being so. The book is both didactic in some sense in that it tries to explain how to invest and how to develop, but it's in the broadest sense about how to make a life in business.
Right. You know, I think the book I've read a lot of real estate books, being in real estate myself, and the title itself is very interesting. Real estate, a love story, and it really shines through the passion that you put into the work. I thought I want to share a video with the audience, um, because I think everyone would like to know, how someone, took this journey from opera to real estate. So here we go. Actually, maybe we'll just start with this quote here. You wrote in the book, "When I look back at what would inspire my career in real estate, a big part of the answer is opera," which we'll get to into a second. I just want to share this video so people know. So the audio might be a little bit off, but let's see how it goes. All
Well,
right.
Eugene, that's what happens when you invite a couple of tenors to dinner. So
What was
always
going
be
on in
careful.
that video, actually?
Two very old friends that I know from when we were really young and trying to make it.
Yeah.
We went to an apprenticeship in Santa Fe. So these are two friends that I happened to have over for a little cocktail at my place, and that was an impromptu. This was Sunday, so this was an impromptu. That's what you get when you invite tenors to your place. So I'm a baritone, but those guys have a zest for life.
And the
So
the audience, the
the
people sitting
audience, that's just a typical dinner at our I don't no, just get well. It's some music lovers, and we just moved to a new place on the Upper West Side, and we thought we should really inaugurate it with music. But I think the roots of my writing this book, certainly the roots of my getting into the real estate business, have a lot to do with uh, a couple of people in my life. And I would say the one that jumps out at me as being incredibly significant was my grandfather, Iskandar. And he he came to the United States in 1941. He took a boat from Persia, and it took him 113 days on a ship, going through the Pacific actually, and dodging Japanese destroyers, and basically to get to the United States to make a new life and have opportunity in this country. He was the story had it that he never even spent 10 cents on a Coke during the boat ride. He was saving every dime that he had to telegram his mother back home, because everyone was worried if he was still alive when he finally made it to California and then to New York City. But he was an incredibly frugal person, and he was kind of a business genius. And so a lot of the values that I learned about real estate and in life, I would say more generally, I really picked up from him, whether even if it was how to wash a car, how to wash it, how to put your elbow into it, how to make sure you're pouring the water while you do it. Otherwise, you're just rinsing it, or you'd have to scrub it. And he was an antique man. So that when he first came here, he was importing and exporting antiques. And I think that, or anything that they could to sort of make a living at that time. But basically, antiques was their specialty. And I will never forget being around his house. He had a knack for finding broken antiques and then fixing them. So there was he had come across an old, I believe it was a Chinese pot, um, or vase, that essentially he had he had a bunch of broken pieces, and it probably took him a year, but you would see him just very slowly adding each broken piece to the pot, and it looked like just a box of shards of junk basically, and you had no idea what this was. And but little by little, you would see this beautiful whole round vase emerged, and I think I came to see that as a metaphor for how my investing in real estate is, because it really is a paradigm for how I invest in real estate. Because with a, I also came to realize that value investment in some ways is a very similar philosophical school to that what I learned from my grandfather fixing this pot. So I started out in this business, really buying broken deals, things where one of my first investments, there was a we were offered a 52% interest in a building that nobody wanted, and we and then I was able to find out who the other 48% were and make a deal with them. Or we bought a piece of land that was leased, for 30 something years, and that deal is still working out. And they just announced, we bought the land. It was leased for nothing for 30 something years. So you couldn't do anything. So it was really broken in terms of time. And subsequent to our purchasing it, and it was purchased from a brother and sister who sadly were not talking to each other, and
Hmm.
made sure that we didn't. They were very upset that the other one might actually make money on this deal, but we were able to put those two broken pieces together to have the whole land. And then we were in the midst of trying to put the present land and the future land, in a sense, when the lease expires, together. Because in the meantime, a Four Seasons was built, and we had an inkling this was coming about a block south of this site. So all of a sudden, the neighborhood became vastly better. And all of these investment strategies, um, I guess putting together my grandfather's school of the broken vase and how to repair it with a value investment approach really launched me in my real estate career.
Sure, you touched on a bunch of interesting topics here. One thing that I pulled out from your book, as you talked quite a bit about risk, was well, maybe I'll just read this really quick. Well, I'll paraphrase it. You were talking about risk and how real estate people obsess about rewards and IRRs. And I think from your grandfather, you got a very different view of risk. You talked about risk as a visceral, tribal, historic understanding of risk. That going back to your family's history, going back to Austro-Hungarian Empire and such. Yeah, could you touch a bit more about that?
Yes. Well, I guess I come from a Jewish family from all over the world, that all met in New York City. So my father's family was in Morocco, and they left Spain in the around 1492 when the Jews were expelled from Spain. They continued to speak Spanish 500 years later in Morocco until my dad came to New York City. And my grandmother's family, my grandfather's family is from Persia. My grandmother's family is from Central Europe, and I guess basically every few generations having to flee your country, um, made made us all hyper focused on education as a way to, as really the only thing you can take with you, and also, um, risk, real estate as something that when you're in a country that is respectful um, of property and stability, in a sense, um, that is something that's also can be extremely inviting. But I think the sense of risk, I really related to the to the value investment school, and and I've since learned a lot about real estate development that I think takes one beyond a strict value investment approach.
Hmm.
But I think I really relate to the idea that that risk lies, a lot of the risk lies in the price you pay.
Hmm.
People think that, okay, well, this is, a multifamily is the safest, let's say, or, to use a common example, and I happen to be in it. So it doesn't matter really what you pay as long as you're buying the best assets, the best location, the best of everything. But then there are ups and downs, and I cite in the book Stuyvesant Town, for example. It was bought for 5 billion, then it was sold again for 2 or 3 billion, and then now it's worth 5 billion again. But if you were unfortunate enough to sell it for 2 billion after you bought it for five, it wasn't it didn't work out that way, even though it's irreplaceable, amazing real estate. So uh, I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what constitutes risk in real estate. There's risk that is intrinsic to the asset itself and to the business opportunity. There's also risk that is, in a sense, baked into the price. So, so that's where I think value investing is really powerful when it's applied to real estate, but it's also really difficult. So, hence
Hmm.
my entire career has, um, looking for things that other people don't appreciate, looking for a deal that is controlled by the tenants, that with all sorts of rent controls, regulations, complex negotiations with that nobody wants, or or a neighborhood that people don't appreciate why it's going to become a really good neighborhood. Those basically being able to see what other people are willing to overlook. I think that's where you get bargains, or at least you get real value, and that protects you from the vagaries of history and of the real estate cycle.
Right. I remember talking about value investing. You had some interesting stories about you were offered an internship or a position with Seth Carlman, right? Or
Yes.
at
Yeah,
Baupost.
that, well, I learned more in those interviews, to be totally honest. Well, I won't say than HBS because that wouldn't be that wouldn't be accurate, nor would it be. Uh, uh, I think I learned more in those interviews about value investing um, than in many hours of study. And I feel like the value investment school, basically, which is a sort of a passionate, in-depth focus on the truth, trying to understand what is trendy, what is sort of false, and what is really true about human behavior, about a particular company or a particular property. I think is incredibly important. And so I guess I also came to this understanding of risk and reward through really comparative finance. I spent my first job was in mergers and acquisitions at Credit Suisse First Boston, and and then I worked in the realm of real estate bonds, which is the world of liar's poker. If any of you have read that, you have some interesting
I have
images
some
here.
slides to maybe add some color.
Well, this is a very deep conversation that you're prompting, Eugene.
Yeah.
Which
I was going to
you know,
start with the real estate projects first, but if you're going to dive into risk, I thought I'd bring this up. So you were
well,
talking about your experience I think, at Credit Suisse and later with post financial crisis, and you brought up these examples. Well, maybe talk about Peter Tufano and how he looked at investments as a combination of risk-free bonds and the premium stacked on top of that. Because you use that kind of
well,
as like a mental model, right, or a framework to.
yes. I think that basically one of my first jobs was in credit tenant long-term leased properties, where the value is it's almost a sum of the parts, or you can disaggregate the real estate risk and reward into the elements that are really bond-like and the elements that relate more to land and the physical asset. And um, I think this might be it might be too deep to dive into, but this is something that I go very much in depth in the book,
Yeah.
in the middle section of the book, which is kind of theory, theory and practice of real estate value investing.
Yeah.
And so
What
maybe
if you
this
were
is
to
just a hint.
simplify it into an algorithm? Let's say you have, let's say everyone starts with the risk-free bonds, but then you talked about subjects such as a liquidity or illiquidity premium, location, and those kinds of things revolving around real estate, right?
Well, I think what's really interesting and what makes real estate so difficult, and but also a great opportunity to invest, is that this it's it's a dynamic situation. So in a sense, I think you start by looking at it as which elements of your property are more bond-like and which elements are more option-like or equity-like.
Hmm.
And you
Maybe we
also
can
have to
dive
sort
into
of
some
layer
of
on
your.
the you can
I don't
layer
know if.
on the oh,
Sorry,
sure.
Josh. Maybe we can dive into some of your projects and have like concrete
Oh
examples
yeah.
for people to think about. You can tell me which ones you want. I have the Alden, the Clifton, and the 321 Miami.
Well, we could start with this one. This is
Yeah.
how
And I have
this
this
is
funny
this
quote
was
here. What do you want to read that message for everyone? This was during your honeymoon, I believe, right?
well, yes, this message this is a message I received. I was actually on my honeymoon in Bali, but that was when Aria uh, really came together, and it was more than just a memo and a couple of letterhead and some business cards. This was an investment that we made during the Great Recession, the last big downturn when Miami was viewed as the epicenter of the bubble and had crashed. So we were able to get a really rare, a really cool piece of land, and we bought it from two banks, one of which was closed down by the FDIC while we were negotiating. So we'd actually gotten a document signed that essentially committed the bank to go through with the transaction, irrespective of whether they would be. Anyhow, basically, this was an investment where I learned a lot because this investment. I started this investment as a real estate investor, and
Right.
by the end of it, I came out a real estate developer. And your ability to shape the business plan in the sense of floor plans, architecture, and uh, really, even in this case, we ended up rezoning the property. We went through a civic process. It took almost 2 years with
Yeah.
city council, neighborhood associations. Um, you can really change the the envelope, the shape of what you're allowed to build, and then within the envelope, you can really change the performance, the financial performance of your property, depending on how you design it for people. So
Hmm.
in this particular property, um, it turned out that people increasingly, as the market recovered after the Great Recession, people wanted bigger and bigger units. So we had started out planning, mostly we thought of more conservatively, two bedrooms of about 1,500 square feet or 1,200 square feet, something like that. And little by little, the market started favoring more family-sized big units because it was really the last piece of property right directly on the ocean, on the sand.
Hmm.
And we knew when we bought it that this was something really special. Of course, we tried to capitalize it. Almost everyone told me we were completely nuts. And why would we ever buy anything in Miami? There was enough. There were 7 years of inventory available, and it was a disaster. But we did it anyway. And then fast forward. It turns out that as we were designing it with Enrique Norton, who's an excellent Mexican architect, and we had a lot of fun and some funny stories came out of this. But basically, it turned out that the business plan kept telling us to do larger and larger units. So in the end, we ended up with floor through apartments. Every apartment, there were only two on a floor, so a private keyed elevator, and every apartment had both east and west. So sunrise and sunset, and also a breeze if you wanted to cross ventilate through that through a hallway. It gave people real access to nature and to different qualities of light. Even though what you can't really see from these images is the building was really sandwiched between two older buildings. So we were able to use the design and architecture to create excellent apartments that really capitalized on the location. That was a revelation to me. And funny enough, we created these were about 3,000 square foot apartments. The first three buyers each bought two apartments and combined them. So,
Oh, not big enough.
so not big enough. So it's an interesting lesson. Most of our projects we've found that smaller options
Mm,
are more interesting and better. If you have a piece of land on the water in Miami Beach, that's one thing. But for most of our cities where we do business, people need a lower price point. Um, there's just um, there's just a voracious appetite for a in Washington, for example, if you can offer something for 2,000 a month or $2,200 a month instead of 3,000, there's just infinite demand at a certain price point. And
mm,
finding ways to make inexpensive apartments really enjoyable is probably a bigger part of our business than these super luxury buildings. So part of, and I think this is something which we share with Hong Kong in a sense, is that
right.
the scarcity of land and opportunity is that you have to, not every square foot, every square inch has to be optimized for what people want. And if you start putting in things people don't want or giving them space that they don't need or can't afford, the business uh, will not be able to hit a, a reasonable price point. Um, in the case of Hong Kong or Miami Beach or New York City, one can always appeal to a very high end price point, and that's often the right business plan. But I think that the really interesting challenge for me has been, can we get the missing middle? Can we somehow make housing that is still fun and sexy and interesting and social and beautifully designed, but at a lower price point? And we've had to play a lot with different shapes and sizes of apartments to
Hmm.
get that experience.
Yeah, I mean, in your book, you went over, for instance, the deal in, where was it, in Maryland, right, where you guys play with the floor plans to get the bedrooms in the right place. That was a deal with Anoop. Um,
Yes, yes.
right, and I've been to your office a few times, and I was kind of struck by how much you guys like to modify the floor plans. You must drive your architects nuts, but I haven't seen a developer do that
100%.
much editing on their floor
I mean,
plans.
I could show you that we have page after page of, um, because we do not trust the architects with our floor plans. I mean,
Okay.
architects, Eugene, their architects are brilliant. They're passionate. And they, but they're not always in the business front. I mean, they're not always looking at the customer and what does the customer want. So that's what makes real estate development such an interdisciplinary field, because you have to somehow synthesize. The architect, wants to make the most beautiful outside of the building. Let's say the engineer is trying to make sure you fit code. You have attorneys and contractors and construction people, architects, all these different players, and you have the customer, and you have to essentially. I think real estate is in a sense form of new product development,
Hmm.
where you have to really understand who you're building for and why to make the price right. So we could show some of those other buildings that
Yeah, sure.
um,
Maybe the Clifton or let me just hold this back up. Yeah, I maybe the
I
Clifton
can
or
just brush
Sure.
This is an historic building that we bought in partnership with really with the help of the tenants who were um, had basically been in there uh, for a very long time with a landlord that was purposely trying to get rid of them.
Right.
So the building was burning down. Basically, there was water pouring in from the roof. There was mold, rats. Um, a drug dealer had taken over a third of the building as his personal realm. And of course, I didn't tell my uncles or my family or anybody that I was going to this place, but I got to meet the drug dealer from afar. And then I was able to buy this building by doing basically the drug dealer's mother was on one of the leases. And in DC, the tenants have enormous rights over transfers of property. So I was able to hang out with the mother and sit down and and just sort of listen to her and her concerns and try to find a way to make things good and better for a few of the tenants that were living here that were really indigent uh, residents that nobody had ever really paid attention to. In fact, any
Hmm.
previous business person had just tried to crush them and get them out at any cost. So one of the things I found also in real estate is that great opportunities often come from if you just show up and are halfway decent to people in our industry, that is half the battle
Right.
because if you go to the Clifton, for example,
Yeah.
it was the tenant attorneys and the Latino Economic Development Center that gave us the opportunity to build this 156 unit building around the corner. That's one of my pride and joy buildings. And in this one, we also worked with the tenants, and we were able to move in about 10 of them back into new apartments in the new building at their original rents in conjunction with the DC inclusionary housing regime. So and that's Miss Peggy, who's one of my favorite all-time tenants and people. She's a sweetheart, and basically we got through this process because we had to rezone this one too to build enough units to make it possible to bring some of the original tenants back in an affordable way. So we were able to change the zoning of the property from 1.8 times FAR to 4 times FAR. It took about 50 meetings, and Miss Peggy came with us to many of them and was really championed the project. I also felt incredibly responsible for her because we had to move her out for a couple of years while we built the building. So, but I was really worried that we would not. She's 80, she's blind. I was worried that she wouldn't make it for us to build the building. But when we got to move her in, and there's a photo of me with her in the new apartment. Um, so that's the Clifton.
And
Happy to share any other projects or touch upon any of the other images if you want to.
yeah,
Yeah,
there was a part you talked about in the book. You talked about like the art of the real estate handshake, and
yes,
that was in a different part of the book, but I thought it related to this because you said that you had vowed to Miss Peggy that she'd be okay, and also in the process of doing real estate deals, that's the whole idea of the handshake is that your word is everything. And I didn't really understand that. Coming from Hong Kong, it's also a similar case where the older generation always says it's a handshake and the deal is done. But you talked about how this trust and values helps speed up the process of deals as well because you don't always have to rely on contracts and whatnot.
right. I think yes. Basically, a lot of deals would never come together if you had to negotiate every possible aspect of it because once you get into every clause and it gets really so complicated and contentious that you never do anything. So basically, I think the handshake is kind of that's the way to avoid that and getting into business with people that if you're recognized as somebody that can be trusted, and you're dealing with somebody also like that, it really opens a lot of doors. Um, I remember having dinner with, I was at a drinks with somebody that had met my grandfather in 1969 or something like that, and they had done a deal, and he actually remembered that he had kept his word and purchased the building, um, exactly what he did, exactly what he had said he was going to do, and that struck me that this is 30, 40, 50 years later. Uh, so I think that, yes, I think that the handshake, is a part of the real estate business that truly, and well, just probably just any business. When
Right.
you read about the deal for that Pfizer and BioNTech did for
Hmm.
the COVID vaccine, it was done by Albert Bourla, who is a actually from a community of Greek Jewish community from the Ottoman Empire that is from a similar story to my own story on my father's side, and the CEO of BioNTech um, was from Mediterranean coast of Turkey, and it turns out that these two guys got together and made a deal basically to save the Pfizer vaccine was the first, and basically to save the world in a sense. And there was no documentation. They
Hmm.
just shook hands on it, and they were able to create this agreement. I think in part because they shared that handshake philosophy.
Right.
So maybe so. Hopefully it's not dying. Hopefully it's not a dying art. It's something that's still alive. But and in the time of COVID, what do you do when there's no handshake? Is it the fist bump philosophy, or is it the? I worried when COVID hit that maybe I'd have to rewrite the whole book, because not just the handshake philosophy, um, the values, but also what would this change about investing in real estate, and how would all the technologies that we're adopting, including Zoom, for example, that we're on right now, how would that change the value of real estate and the trajectory of cities? So I ended up writing a part four that talks
Right.
about all those questions. That, uh, but fortunately, I think some of the timeless elements of the book that about what people are about and how people have returned, and the world is really coming back.
Right. I mean, I think that was very interesting because I think in the beginning of the book you talk about, growing up in the city and sort of your story about how you got into opera. And at the end of the book, you go back to it and talk about how you think, the American city is important for, well, I'll let you explain why you love the city.
Well, I guess I think that there's been a significant debate over whether cities are dead, basically, in the last year or so. Does remote work, look at what we're doing here? I mean, in a sense, uh, we're with a 13-hour time difference, and we're halfway across the world. We're doing this over Zoom. Many people are wondering, I think we're wondering during the depth of COVID, would that replace office? Would that replace
Mm.
cities? Many people move to the suburbs, at least in the New York market, and in the United States at large. There's been a huge swing towards more suburban living. People want more outdoor space, and uh, but I think if one is looking at the technological, it was quoted that many of the CIOs of corporations felt that their technological adaptation plan was advanced 7 years because
Mm.
of COVID, in just basically in a matter of months. I think so that's the context in which I wrote part four. I think New York is back, so I think we don't have to necessarily fear that it's the death of cities, but I do think I have to say I wasn't. I wasn't that worried. I was very much a believer that people like to be in the same place to congregate with other smart people doing interesting things. People want to meet someone. They want to um, make a life together. They want to have friends. They want to play music, like we heard earlier. So I think that cities are, have been with us for a very long time and are going to stick around. But I do think it's fascinating to watch how technological changes um, change the city and change the geography of opportunity. When you had the shape of the map of the United States is significantly impacted by technological changes. The first cities were along the coast with ships from England and other European countries. Um, the railroad opened up, the Wild West, for example, and Chicago. Um, or horseback, certainly took people across the continent. And then you had river towns because shipping was essential. So all the Mississippi River related towns that then haven't prospered as much as technology has moved to trucking, for example. So if you were on the railroad or on the canal, when if you were on the canal when the railroad was invented, like the Erie Canal in upstate New York, was a masterpiece of 19th century infrastructure spending. I hope we spend our new infrastructure spending better than than they did with the Erie Canal because it was like the most genius investment. I think it was the Bitcoin investment of you looked like a genius for buying the Erie Canal, and then the railroad came about, and then people didn't need to take barges up and down. They put them on a railroad. The automobile made Los Angeles really a place, and along with Hollywood and film technology. And when you think about the Sunbelt cities of America that are exploding right now, they wouldn't be there without air conditioning. So, and these are inventions of the last 50 or 100 years. Um, so I think it's dangerous to get complacent that these technological changes aren't going to affect us. Um, just how they're going to affect us, I'll have to leave that to the book, or I'll leave it to the imagination
Yeah.
um,
Well,
of
you
what
talked
what
about like different investments you were doing now in smaller towns, right? To adapt to some of these changes.
right. We made some investments in secondary cities that are up and coming cities where you can really live for half the price of New York City, and that are really popular among Gen Z and millennial workers. It used to be that the headquarters of major companies went where the boss wanted to live. So the old headquarters of IBM in the 80s, for example, was in Westchester. If the boss lived there and it was close to his golf course, it was mostly he at that time. Then he was going to put it damn well. He was going to put all those employees to work in that area. That has really changed as you have a much more diverse workforce and a much younger and more technologically focused workforce. Now the companies are going where young people want to go. So Nashville has a terrific music scene, and it's half the price of New York, so companies are following. Um, Washington D.C. continues to have a lot of job creation, and I think New York also is becoming a tech hub as well as a
Hmm.
media and finance hub. But uh, some of these cities that weren't really on the map for international investment are are coming fast because if they're a great place for a young person to make a life, and the talent wants to be there, then now the companies have to be there, and then the real estate needs to be there. So we made an investment in Nashville during the depths of the this last COVID downturn, and one in Charlotte. Um, we had made one significant investment in Washington, a very big investment for a new development in Washington. And I've got to say, while I was always confident that cities would be back, it was a long pandemic for people in urban real estate. Um, it made on a personal level, I would say it really shakes your confidence. And I actually held back publishing the book just because I wanted to be able to publish the book at a time when I could actually talk like this and enjoy it. That was a time when things were really difficult. So this last year and this few months have actually been an incredible turnaround. Um, I wish I could say that it shows that we knew it all along, but we got some great news in terms of employment around our multifamily residential projects in Washington. We the Securities and Exchange Commission is building a 1.2 million square foot headquarters with 4,500 employees, literally across the street from one of our up and coming projects. That
Mm.
was a little early, and we may have been too early, and maybe we were very patient, and then boom,
Which
we got
project
that.
was this?
That's One Florida Avenue. I don't think it's in the
Oh, okay.
slides, but that's One Florida Avenue in Washington, Northeast in Washington D.C., an emerging area that we bet on. Similarly, in Nashville, we bought
Mm-hmm.
one project, development site that we've since done a lot of assemblage and are still doing assemblage around. But
Mm-hmm.
the first site we bought, um, subsequent to us going into contract, Oracle announced that they are putting their regional headquarters uh, zero point 0.8 miles up the street. So, also an emerging area. So, I think basically we are very lucky this year,
Yeah.
and and I'll be thankful at that. Although I think that there are getting lucky in real estate usually means that you've worked your behind off for for years or decades, um, or that you're really attuned to what makes a good location.
Mm-hmm.
And we've gotten unlucky in the past, and I've seen it happen both ways. So when it does go your way, you got to be very thankful and appreciative, and then look back and try to figure out where what did you do right or wrong, and how do we do it better the next time.
Right. Josh, we have some well, we have a question from Rawin, and also I want to encourage the audience if anyone has any questions to enter in the chat room. Um, so actually, I want to follow up on your comment first though before I get to Rawin's question. I think we were talking about this other day. I drew this graph for you, right? You remember um, the whole distribution of returns thing that we talked about? Uh,
Yes.
just to, like, so everyone knows what they're looking at. On the far right side, we have distribution of returns, and you have, for instance, venture capital. Um, Out of thousands of projects or simulations, you would have positive return with a positive skew. You have a couple of Facebooks and whatnot. Real estate will have a negative skew, but you expect to make money on the long term on average. And then, just as an example, gambling at the very bottom has a expected return that's negative, but has a positive skew. That's why people do it, because everyone's, well, you have the jackpot. So with that background, we were talking about how to eliminate risk, how to shift this curve in terms of real estate, location, changes in the neighborhood.
Yes. I mean, I think I like your way of looking at it, which is kind of similar to a Monte Carlo simulation, which is has combines gambling with real estate and finance theory. So, um, I hate gambling. I'm very bad at
Yes.
it. I don't like it. It's actually like my worst nightmare, gambling. That's probably why I went into real estate investing. Um, I should have gone into technology. I'd be doing a lot better, but I can't. I don't like risk, and I don't like gambling. It's actually gambling is just pure risk, and you have to sit there in a space designed for you to be addicted. So have you ever noticed that there are no clocks in a casino? There are no exit signs, and the carpets are so hideous, and the design is so garish and bright that you can't your eyes there's nowhere for your eye to find peace. And this is intentional. The architects and designers there, they make it freezing, and they don't give your eyes any rest. You'll notice next time you're there, the carpets, the
Yeah.
design, everything is full of movement and strong clashing colors, reds and different colors that you can't find peace. The only place you can focus on is, and you can never find an exit. There's no way out. You experience this next
Yeah.
time. Um, but basically, the question in real estate is, can you? I think value investment helps you reduce the extreme. You can never eliminate all risk, but value investment strategies, as described in the book and described in our discussion, help you reduce the wing of the curve that the extreme downside scenarios, and that is that's a big part of the battle, making money on the buy.
Hmm.
But you can also make money on the build in real estate, and I think that's
There's
sort of
your
the art of
four
it.
quadrants, right?
You can make money on the build, and um, I think even in addition to these quadrants, which are a framework that presents sort of a static situation, your real estate can get better or worse in real time. So, and and that can happen one of two ways. One is the area around you can get better. So that's what when if Oracle announces they're putting 8,500 employees up the street, your area just got better. My phrase for that is a quote from an opera that I love by Rossini, which where it says that the cheese just fell on the macaroni. So
Nice.
when Oracle comes or the Four Seasons announces that they're opening up next door, the cheese has fallen on the macaroni. Just be thankful. And but that but if you know where to look, those things happen more frequently than they should. So, for example, in this Nashville thing, we found there was a really cool dive bar that was called the Dive Motel, which was had an Elvis room and a swimming pool and a cocktail lounge, and there was a neat bodega, like a hipster bodega, um, and I don't know. You can look where in downtown Miami, where we've been investing. In the meantime, two major museums have been built: an art museum and a science museum, and a high-speed railroad. The introduction of new train stops, new subway stops, completely changes the dynamics of a location. So location is not static. You make money on the buy through value investment, but then real estate development is really the art of investing where the neighborhood is going to make you look like a genius. So
Yeah.
whether it's Long Island City or downtown Miami or all these places that are where other people are going to invest, where the government is going to invest huge infrastructure that benefits you, or designing your building in such a way that it is perfectly efficient and satisfying human needs, and the design and architecture and floor plans hit the spot so that you basically take your scarce resources and address what the customer needs exactly.
Hmm.
Like, if it's a large unit, if it's a smaller unit, if it's an office that needs a park, if it needs a playground, if it needs a roof deck, if it needs a meditation room, if it needs a pet facility, um, you have the power in real estate to design your own experience. And in a sense, you make your own destiny and your own good luck.
Right. That's the nudge that destiny needed you talked about in the book, right?
Yes.
Um, I okay. We're coming to the end of the talk, so I do want to adjust. So Ron asked a question earlier. I'll just read it out. Very interesting comments regarding COVID. Sounds like we will more or less revert to before. How about autonomous driving? Do you think it will change people's choices of where they live?
That's very interesting. I guess I would clarify that I'm not sure if it will revert to before. I think it is going to change, and it's changing particularly retail and office. Um, it's changing commuting patterns and retail and office. I don't think it's. I think it's something that I want to continue to study and learn about how people are going to react. One of the things that, um, well, I do believe that autonomous vehicles will I think Uber has already impacted real estate. For example, in Washington, um, if you're it used to be that if you're 5 minutes from the metro or 8, 10 minutes to the metro, you're golden. But as soon as you get to that 15 minutes to the metro, you're sort of in trouble.
Yeah.
And also ability of people to Uber allows you to be a tiny bit further away. If let's say you don't want to walk that day, you can either get to the office or equally importantly, Uber allows people to go out and have a drink and then drive home safely without without DUI basically, um, which I think influences sort of the intermediate ring of where people are going to live. So I can only imagine that autonomous driving will have another layer of impact on how people choose to situate themselves vis-a-vis their work and their favorite restaurants or bars. I would also say that I guess it's so interesting. Some of this is the more things change, the more they stay the same, and some of this is actual changes of technology changing how economic activity is organized.
Hmm.
On the field of the more things change, the more they stay the same, I love walking. I personally love walking, and I feel like I love cities and neighborhoods that are oriented around walking. Often that's the older neighborhoods that came from either the Middle Ages or the 19th century or urban design where you can live, work, and play, walk to meet friends. So I feel like uh, I feel like in some ways we're returning to our roots in that when people aren't super thrilled about uh, jumping in this public transportation during COVID, for example, people are walking. We're eating outdoors.
Mm.
It creates a much better urban design experience when you have all these outdoor
Interesting.
cafes. And so I think that there's a balance between timeless human truths and then following the path of the economy as impacted by technology.
Right. That's where you have your chance encounters and meet people and dive into opera serendipitously, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or like when we were on a train going to Washington, if
Yeah.
I recall correctly, on
Yes.
my very first deal.
Yeah.
So
Uh, we have a question from Jesse. I don't know if Karen can help us um, connect him in for a question. It's one.
Hey, I don't know if you guys can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I can just ask it. First off, Eugene, Josh, this is great. Thank you guys for taking the time. My seat, I sit on kind of global markets. So this is a world that, I don't have much exposure to. It's great to get this insight. So thank you. Josh, my question is, when you kind of first left Credit Suisse and then went into this space, it seems from your discussion that you have a very kind of disciplined view on how you approach your investments now. How maybe you can just elaborate on how that kind of process developed over time, and then and my second part of this question is, when did you feel that you were able to kind of go out and do this on your own and kind of run a company?
oh, that's a great question. I think the learnings take place, constantly throughout this process, and I really came into my own understanding how to invest by comparing different experiences. So it actually took a while of when after I was at Credit Suisse First Boston, I spent some time working for a REIT hedge fund. So that was another way of looking at the same kind of questions of underlying valuation and are you acquiring value, some of the parts, applied to real estate in a public market context. And I also spent some time working for my uncles in my extended family real estate business, working on more of the development side, trying to learn how to build a building. After September 11th, there was a significant impetus to develop in Lower Manhattan. So I got a chance to learn about um, essentially excavation, real estate, all the nuts and bolts of real estate, which are a big part of a life in this field. I would say a lot of it started to come together when I was at Square Mile Capital. After HBS, I got a job with this what was then kind of emerging private equity fund that was focused on both debt and equity. I personally think it's incredibly valuable to understand and immerse yourself in both real estate debt investing and equity investing, because I think each one makes you better at the other. The real estate equity people often need to think more like debt investors sometimes, and I feel like real estate debt investors would really benefit often from understanding and stepping in the shoes of an equity perspective. But I really learned a lot at that Square Mile position, and I learned a lot at HBS about portfolio composition and sort of what are the theoretical underpinnings for stuff that I kind of knew in my skin. I knew this was right, but I didn't know exactly how to make sense of it. And value investing was one of those things. So when I was at Square Mile, I guess I started Aria in 2009. So basically, the world was kind of collapsing, and I felt like with my frugal way of looking at things, basically I would get stuff cheap and I would be doing a low risk thing at that time. That was how I looked at it. By starting my own company, the only time I thought I'd have the confidence to start my own company was in a time like 2009 when things were cheap and in a sense the bar was low. There was room for new entrants, but I felt that my risk would be mitigated because I was buying things in great locations really cheaply. And that's what it took for me to go out and start my own company. And also, I partnered with longtime friends that I've been very happy to be able to do business with. That's another thing that kind of gives you the confidence. My sense is that you always have that option. It's almost like pulling the the eject button on your plane, and you get that once in a sense. So I would save it for when you really. It's always amazing to continue to learn from different organizations, and I've learned so much from each of the places that I've worked. When you pull that eject button, you really have to have conviction, in my view, that you have an investment thesis that you truly believe in. Because going out on your own is for me, it was sort of scary. It's a big deal, and even though you could always come back to a more institutional environment, I think I would say you can always do that later in the future, and sort of you're gaining strength and confidence, everything that you learn in different jobs. On the other hand, I would say if you have conviction in an opportunity, in yourself or a team, then go for it, because it's one of the most fun things in life. So that's my 2 cents.
And Josh, you also you said you wrote a memo before when this all started, right?
Yes, I still have it. It was called Focus on Illiquidity, or that's at least that's what my ThinkPad named it, because that was the first few words of the memo. But I didn't actually show it to anyone because I thought, well, what is a guy that's, I guess I don't know, 32, that I'm going to have a memo on financial theory and how to invest? People are going to laugh at me. So I kind of kept my own memo basically to myself, but it was a memo on how I should invest in this environment, which was at that time scary as hell. Nobody knew what the heck was going on, which was an advantage because I was able to get in and have confidence and invest with conviction because I had thought through these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of not quite a business plan, but it laid out who I wanted to do business with, this friend, that person, our mutual friend Anoop, this one, this cousin, this major investor, and how could these are the people that if I do start this, I really want to be in business with, and these are the principles, and this is how I'm going to try to find business.
Right.
And that's what led to this, to starting Aria. And I think if you have that level of conviction around, uh, I guess I would say around the ideas. For me, it was, I didn't have as much self-confidence. It was more that I thought my ideas were good. And whatever works to get you into that frame of confidence where you can actually go out and do it. If you have the right ideas or the right principles and the right network and friends and contacts that will help build something, I would highly recommend doing it once in your life.
Right.
Somewhere early, later, in the middle. It's definitely something to do at one time in life, in my opinion.
Great. And thanks, Jesse, for the question. So we are coming to the end of our event, but I just want to wrap up with a quick series of rapid fire questions. So
Oh
Josh,
gosh,
just
okay.
try to answer these quickly. As part of the fun of it. All right.
You got it.
All right. Favorite opera.
Rigoletto.
Best destination for
Giuseppe
vacation.
Verdi. Bali.
Historic role model.
Moses.
What scares you?
I was going to say public speaking. No, just kidding. Not being able to accomplish all the big dreams and ideas that I really want to put out there.
Apple or Android?
Apple.
Night or morning person?
Morning.
And finally, what is success for you?
Success is for me making a difference in people's lives and leaving the world a little better than when I found it.
Great, beautiful. Thank you, Josh. So
Thank you.
we're going to wrap this up. Before we go, can you tell everyone where to get your book and how to reach out to you?
Sure. Well, the book is for sale on Amazon and any of the other spots. It's actually we just created the audiobook, which I'm narrating. So I'm reading it, and it's actually kind of fun. I had a blast doing it. I'd never done anything like that. It took me like 15 hours in the studio to get about 7 hours of recorded audio. So it's you can check it out on realestatealovestory.com is the website for the book, which has some reviews and some other content. And that has links to all the places to buy it. You can check out the audiobook. I'm happy to keep in touch with folks on LinkedIn or on Instagram if you like watching opera videos, or
Sure.
But I also, if I'm volunteering you, Eugene, as a resident Josh whisperer, or by all means reach out to Eugene, or my email is jb@ariadevelopmentgroup.com. So anyone's welcome to be in touch through any of those different mechanisms.
Great. Thanks, Josh. And thanks again to the HBS Association of Hong Kong and the Yale Club of Hong Kong. So that concludes our
Thank you very
event.
much.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. Good night
Take care.
or good morning.
Thank
night.
you.
Good night. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Eugene.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Really,
you.
really enjoyed your thoughts, Josh.
Many thanks.